Welcome to the cheating channel. Our friends in blue appeared by my garage in the form of two police officers in a patrol car. I watched them from under the lift, staying out of sight. It was unusual to see such cheerful police officers. Their expressions grew more serious as they approached me. They confirmed my identity and informed me they had bad news. Something had happened to my wife at our home, and she was in the hospital, but they couldn't go into details that I tried to leave immediately. But they stopped me, wanting a few answers. Can you explain where you've been for the past 3 hours, sir? Yes, officer, I've been here all day. Just ask my two mechanics. I did slip out for 10 minutes around 11 a.m. to grab us some coffee. One of the officers went over to talk to Mike and Pete, while the other noted down the coffee shop I had been to. Can you show me your vehicle, sir? He asked. Of course, my truck's outside. I led him outside to my pride and joy. The thorough officer combed through the interior, then opened the hood and felt the engine. Cold as a stone. All done, sir, you may go to the hospital. Worry was written on my face as the hospital staff explained the extent of Kate's injuries, the fact that she had received a blood transfusion, and then informed me that she was currently in surgery. I thought it was highly unprofessional for the doctor to be half smiling the entire time he was speaking to me. On my way out of the hospital, the same two police officers from the garage intercepted me again. They wanted a few more answers. We moved to the hospital cafeteria to have some much-needed coffee. They wanted to know about my relationship with my wife. I explained that we met and married relatively late 8 years ago. Kate had a successful career as a lawyer in a major local firm. She had always wanted children, in principle, but resisted my urging until she was almost 40, as she wanted to establish herself in her career first. They asked why she was home on a weekday. I explained that Kate had left her job a month ago to rest up before starting a family. Sort of a break before at least 10 years of being a stay-at-home mom. I then added that I loved my wife, things were good between us, and we were both eagerly looking forward to having a child. They asked if I knew a John Barton. When I replied no and asked why they were asking, they evaded the question and left, and I knew I could rely on my guys to lock up the garage, so I went straight home. At the house, 2 forensic specialists and 1 detective were searching around. The detective introduced himself and explained what he knew. Then he asked me the same questions the previous officers had, plus 1 new one. Can you explain why we found several drops of blood in the first-floor bathroom, sir? Sorry, detective, I have no idea. Now, may I ask you something? It's quite clear that you're not treating this as an accident, and it seems I'm being viewed as a suspect. Can you assure me that you're not solely focusing on me but are also looking for the real perpetrator? Rest assured, sir, we have several lines of inquiry. My colleague is currently speaking with Mrs. Barton. Who is this John Barton I keep hearing about? Sorry, sir, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment. Then he and the forensic team left, leaving me in a state of confusion that I went upstairs to the master bedroom and looked over the scene of the bloody struggle. I would have been truly shocked if it were my first time seeing it. Earlier that day, around 10 a.m. at work, I started thinking about sex. There's nothing unusual about that. They say guys think about sex an average of 67 times per waking hour. Let me tell you, men who have practically been cut off from their wives for a month can probably double that. Since Kate left her job, our 2 to 3 times a week dropped to nearly 0. Kate was either not in the mood, missing her work and feeling down, or simply too tired. Personally, I thought it was because her usual life was almost over, and she was just scared. As a caring husband, I didn't want to push her. She would overcome her fears at her own pace. I knew my life would change after having kids, but I understood hers would turn upside down. I kept reminiscing about what our sex life was like in the early years of our marriage. Anywhere, anytime, in any situation. We made an effort to keep it fresh and exciting as long as our imagination held up, but eventually, we slipped into that automatic mode that many long-term partners end up in. That I snapped out of my days. I knew what to do, bring back the spontaneity. Go home right now and take Kate to the point of exhaustion. All right, decision made. Time to pack up and head home. I told Mike and Pete that I'd be out for a bit. Pete asked if I could take the car he had just finished servicing for a test drive. When I arrived home, I was disappointed to see an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Damn it, A visit from one of her friends was going to ruin my plans. Still, I decided to go in. Maybe I could persuade her friend to leave, and my plans could still be saved. Without any suspicion or attempt to be stealthy, I opened the front door. Instantly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I realized that my marriage was over. The unmistakable sounds of enthusiastic sexual activity were echoing loudly down the stairs. It was almost reflexive. I pulled out my phone and started recording video. Whenever a client brought a car to the garage, I'd always make a quick video recording so we wouldn't get blamed for any scratches. With my heart pounding wildly, I ran up the stairs, video camera ready, and looked into the bedroom. Yes, it was Kate. And yes, it was some guy I didn't recognize, happily having sex with her on our bed. Fighting the urge to rush in and kill him, I turned away. I can honestly say that it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. My legs gave out and I collapsed on the floor right outside the door. Completely devastated. I was only vaguely aware that they were reaching their climax just a few feet away. I don't know how long I stayed there, but gradually, it sank in that all the sounds of their adultery had stopped, and now only talking could be heard. It was just as painful and still tore at me deeply. I realized I had to move out of earshot to buy myself some time to think. I instinctively knew that any reaction based purely on emotion would, at the very least, land him in the hospital and me in jail. I needed time to think. I quietly got up from the floor, tiptoed downstairs, and collapsed onto the couch. Away from the sights, smells, and most of the sounds of betrayal, I was free from emotional distractions. I did what I did best and devised a plan. Get him out of the room and out of sight, beat the crap out of him somewhere that wouldn't leave too many bruises. The stomach needed to be in perfect shape. Then throw him out the back door, naked. Go back for her and throw her out the door, naked. That should leave a strong impression and ensure me complete freedom. Without bruises or witnesses, I hoped to avoid court. Fortunately, I had the perfect tool for a shock effect in my workshop. 2 years ago, I served in the Army Reserve National Guard where, thanks to my skills, I was assigned to clean the trucks we returned to base with. That's where I found a small device that would now come in handy. The police call them flashbang grenades. Slightly larger than a regular grenade, they're essentially a small canister with a lever pin ignition mechanism. They were specially made for hostage rescue operations and were designed to cause minimal physical harm, so they could be thrown into a room full of innocent people without significant damage. However, the explosion is accompanied by a flash equivalent to 8 million candle power and a shock sound at 170 decibels. The flash alone can stun a person intensely for at least 5 seconds. My mind, driven by newfound hatred, quickly filled in the rest of the plan. I didn't want to ruin my house, so I couldn't just throw the grenade on the floor. I took out the device, quickly attached a short piece of rope to it, and tied a loop at the end of the rope. Having prepared, I tiptoed back upstairs. As I got closer, I realized stealth was no longer necessary. I could clearly hear the man's moans coming from behind the bedroom door. Pausing only to pick up my phone from where I dropped it on the floor outside, I looked at the door frame. As I stood by the door, I saw the guy confidently positioned at the end of the bed, while Kate was focused on him, fully absorbed in her moves. She had a way of making things look effortless, and her skill was unmatched, something I'd never experienced with anyone else. Her technique was enough to leave anyone speechless. I tried to keep my emotions in check as I watched, but it was nearly impossible to separate what I saw from how I felt. Peeking around the corner again, I confirmed that his eyes were tightly closed. This time, I noticed his hands on her head. A faint gagging sound escaped her throat, but she continued. Going over the steps in my mind, I took a deep breath and began. I set up the device in the room, securing it and pulling the pin before stepping out and covering my ears. Even from outside, I felt the blast's force. When I went back in, what I saw was shocking. The guy was on the bed, badly hurt and bleeding, while Kate lay on the floor in shock, her face covered in blood. Stepping out to think, I suddenly heard painful screams from inside. I realized my plan had gone wrong. When I looked back, the guy was curled up on the floor, clutching his injury and yelling. Kate was gone, leaving a blood trail to the bathroom. Acting fast, I cleared any remaining evidence and followed the trail, finding her in the bathroom, unwell. As I left, I spotted something in the blood, a small piece of flesh, which I quickly got rid of. Driving away, I made sure not to attract attention, finally reaching my garage. My friends Pete and Mike rushed over when they saw I was visibly shaken. "Guys, I need you to be my alibi for the last 45 minutes. What do you say?" "Of course, boss," they answered almost in unison. "Well, before you agree so quickly, I should tell you that what I did is pretty serious, and once I explain, you might not answer as quickly. I don't know what they'll charge me with, but it could mean jail time." Before explaining it to them, I went into my office and threw on an old, dirty jumpsuit. Then I grabbed an oily rag from the trash can and rubbed it on my face and hands. I didn't know when the police would show up here, but I expected them. The guys looked at me, a little bewildered. I briefly recounted the recent events. Mike was the first to break. He tried to hold it in for a good 15 seconds, then burst out laughing. This broke the ice for Pete, who soon joined Mike and me in uncontrollable laughter. It took a full 5 minutes for us all to regain control, and after a few handshakes and promises of support, they returned to their greasy engine bays. Over the next hour, spontaneous laughter erupted from various dirty corners of the shop. My wife, Kate, was about to reap what she had sown for keeping herself distant from my modest friends in the past. Do you know how hard it is to clean up blood? That sticky stuff clings to blankets like glue. That night, I only managed to clean the bathroom floor. I decided to throw out the bedding and made a note to buy a new rug for the bedroom. The torn curtains would have to go, too. I tried to stay busy, avoiding any thoughts. The process wasn't helped by the constant phone calls and knocks at the door. Yes, the media were in a feeding frenzy. A story combining adultery and a guy who'd lost his manhood was like manna from heaven for them. I opened the door only once and soon turned off my phone. Finally, with nothing left to distract me, I delved into some self-reflection. Do I regret what I did? Strangely, no. I've always had a deep-seated hatred for cheaters. I'd seen too many men reduced to shells of themselves after catching their partners in infidelity. The funny thing is, just before lunch today, I would have bet my life that my wife shared that same passion. I was stunned by how wrong I was. Not to mention, I was utterly shocked by Kate's motivation. She had always seemed as committed to me as I was to her, and our sex life had been great, at least until recently. After hours of inner turmoil, I managed to identify only one clue. I recalled how, 2 months ago, the hairs on the back of my neck had stood up when Kate announced she was quitting her job to enjoy her last days of freedom. I had expected her to work at least until the 7th month of pregnancy. Something about her words, about wanting a final hurrah before we had kids, had struck me as odd. My thoughts were interrupted by a call on my personal cell. Very few people knew that number. The caller ID showed it was Kate's parents. They lived in the same state but about 3 hours away. I'd always gotten along fantastically with them, so I answered. After much less small talk than usual, her mother got straight to the point. "Dave, what's going on? Do you know why a bunch of journalists are crowding outside our house?" Well, they'd have to know sooner or later, but I wasn't looking forward to explaining. "Mom, did you catch the local news tonight? Maybe the top story?" I asked, hoping to ease into it. "Oh, you mean that story about some cheater who injured her lover?" She replied in her usual straightforward way, which somehow made this even harder. "Yes, Mom. Here's the thing, the woman they're talking about. Her name is Kate." Fortunately, my awkwardness was cut short by a scream, followed by the call disconnecting. As I pressed the end call button, I noticed a notification on the screen. It reminded me that I'd recorded the end of my marriage only 8 hours ago. I vaguely remembered leaving my phone recording by the bedroom door. I knew that if I never understood or believed the reason Kate did what she did, I would never be able to trust another woman again. There was a good chance I'd end up dying a lonely, bitter misogynist, doomed to a wasted life. With desperate hope, I started playing the video. I already knew what it showed. There was Kate in a moment I'd rather not see again. The pain was too fresh to relive that scene again. I closed my eyes just as I set the phone down on the floor. With no visual, just a view of the hallway ceiling, I had to imagine Mr. and Mrs. Adulterer lying side by side on the bed. The audio wasn't clear, so I uploaded the file to my computer and ran it through an amplifier. This is the important part of their conversation. Wow, Kate, that was fantastic. Actually, this past week has been incredible. Does it really have to end today? My offer still stands. Just say the word, and I'll divorce Sarah and marry you. Oh sure, like that would work. Great start to a marriage with a guy who's ditched his wife and kids. No, I love Dave too much to hurt him like that. Besides, he's a great husband and will be a good father. After today, I'm going to be Mrs. Goody-Goody housewife, at least until the youngest of our kids goes to school. You can't love him that much. He's not the one lying here, is it? No, you're wrong. I love him very much. From the moment I met him, I knew he was my one true soulmate. I'll never find another. We're so compatible in a sexual sense that he can take me places no one else ever has. I'm happy to have such a good man. Someone who spoils me and will take care of me when I have a big belly carrying his 2 or 3 babies. No, there's nothing I want more than to die in his arms, surrounded by our grandchildren. Well, that was a great speech, but the obvious question is, why am I here? At least Kate had the decency to think about that. There was a good half-minute of silence. Maybe I just missed the past. I didn't get married until I was 31, and I was a bit of a wild girl. I miss how I could just walk into a bar and get hit on by all kinds of guys. The thrill of leading a guy on and then impulsively deciding whether he'd score or not. Recently, every other weekend, Dave's been going on deer hunting trips with his buddies. 3 weekends ago, I decided to take a little trip down memory lane and stop by a bar. It led to one night that was all right, but not satisfying. Then, last Saturday, I happened to walk into the bar where you were, and here we are. My God, Kate, you're so cold. Just think of it as the last hurrah. Anyway, what are you complaining about, Mr. Big Shot? Come here, I said it had to end today, not that it had to end right now. I muted the audio. At least now I knew that I was a good lover and husband. The problem wasn't me. The following days passed in utter disappointment. After 2 days, the reporters disbanded and left my quiet street. A hospital administrator called to inform me that Kate would like to have her pajamas. I ignored it. She'd have to settle for those humiliating hospital gowns. 2 days later, her father called me. He apologized for his daughter's behavior and expressed hope that I'd stay in touch with him. To try to sweeten the deal, he reminded me that he had another daughter, recently divorced. Sorry, Dad, that's just a bit too weird. For days after the incident, it appeared on the news again. Mr. Not-So-Big was discharged from the hospital. Journalists had dug up some dirt and exposed him as a serial cheater. So, with some satisfaction, they reported that although surgeons had managed to reattach his manhood, it was highly unlikely to function in any of its intended ways. At the end of that week, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Barton, or Sarah, as she insisted I call her, was a pleasant-looking woman with sad eyes. She told me she'd heard rumors that I might have evidence that could help her in her divorce case. I explained that I might, but I couldn't admit to it without incriminating myself. She understood and apologized for asking. I told her that, in my opinion, there was enough circumstantial evidence that she wouldn't need anything from me. If that proved untrue, I'd ask her to come back, and I might reconsider. She looked so sad that I felt sorry for her. Pulling up the video file, I showed her only the aftermath of the explosion. The shock of her husband's screams made her flinch at first, but she quickly composed herself. Suffice it to say, she wasn't too sad as she left. Being the helpful guy I am, I invited her to come by when the sadness returned, to keep me company. Oh yes, that wasn't the last time I saw Sarah Barton. The last visitor I received was probably the strangest. On Saturday, I opened the door to the detective I'd spoken with in the house on the day of the big incident. The suit was gone. He was now dressed in jeans and a shirt. Hey son, no, I won't come in. I just wanted to let you know that, due to insufficient evidence, I recommended closing the case. Hearing my thanks, he turned to leave but stopped and looked back. Listen, I'll be retiring at the end of the year. If I come by after that, will you tell me how you did it? I just smiled and wished him a good day. The letter from Kate arrived the following Tuesday. My dear Dave, I can't express how ashamed and sorry I am for what I did to you. I fully understand why you couldn't bring yourself to visit me, and I forgive you unconditionally that I never considered the full extent of the possible consequences of my actions. I certainly didn't expect my parents to practically disown me. I know I've lost your love, trust, and respect forever, which hurts me more than I can describe. I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but if it might help you heal, I'd like to explain why I did what I did. Just know that it's all my fault. The doctors say I may not be able to speak properly for a long time, if ever. They think I swallowed the tip of my tongue when I bit it off. They're telling me about some kind of experimental stretching technique that could restore some function. I hope it works so I can at least return to my career and distract myself from the bleak, loveless, childless future I now face. Ask for whatever you want in the divorce and I'll sign. If you could find it in your heart to keep me on your medical insurance for a little while, I would be infinitely grateful. Goodbye, my love. I wish you only happiness in the future. I hope I haven't completely ruined your life. Yours, Kate, your cheating wife. I have to say, the letter touched me. So much so that I immediately canceled my previous decision and sent her some pajamas at the hospital. Now, where are Mike and Pete's numbers? I owe them a beer, a keg each. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of Cheating Secrets. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.